All right, and here we go. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Webline, a podcast about Spider-Man and his amazing world. Here, we discuss all aspects of our favorite web slinger in a fun, informal, but informative forum. I am your humble host, the Spidey Librarian, and with me now is my guest, friend, and fellow Marvel nerd, Diane Maenad. Diane, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Well, it's good to have you here. In this week's episode, Diane and I will be doing a character deep dive into the Spider-Man who started it all, Peter Parker. So far, the webline has mostly covered Miles-centric content, and given that timing-wise we launched right as Across the Spider-Verse was hitting theaters, that should be understandable. But let's not forget that without the 60-plus years of stories and content that have been produced with Peter Parker at the forefront, we wouldn't have much of the settings and situations that give rise to Miles in the first place. As a pop culture creation, Peter Parker's impact and legacy cannot be denied. He is much beloved by the Spider-Man, superhero, and comic book communities at large, and in the last several decades has become a mainstay in movies and video games. His near meteoric growth in popularity over the years is a testament to the writers, artists, filmmakers, and producers who created and developed the character, as well as a reflection of the culture that has identified with, cherished, and demanded more of his adventures. But before we do a daring dive into our terrific topic, it's time to dish on the latest Spiderific developments with our knockout news segment, the Bugle Newsletter. Our first item, Tom Holland has announced that he is taking a 1-year break, hiatus, whatever you want to call it, from acting. His latest project, The Crowded Room, which will be on Apple TV Plus, broke him, and he always has been a fairly outspoken advocate for mental health and everything, and he says that he basically needs a mental health break. Needs to kind of just chill out from all the pressure, be a regular bloke, as he said it. And so he's going to be taking a year off. And I gotta say, I'm kind of with him on this. I mean, I still want him to do more Spider-Man movies. And if in order to get him to do that, he needs to take a year off, I say give him the year off. Diane, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. And given the situation with the writer's strike and now there SAG-AFTRA is also looking at going on strike, it's an excellent time to do it because there aren't a lot of projects. Excuse me, hiccups, terrible
That's okay.
timing. There's not going to be a lot that's going to be worked on, and obviously we don't expect him to be a scab and cross picket lines to work. So this is a good time to take the time off.
I didn't even
And
think about that. You're absolutely right, though.
and I agree as far as mental health goes, he's certainly not going to starve from taking a year off at the point
Right.
in his career that he's at, and he'll do better work when he's in a better place.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you. Um, for anyone listening or watching right now, Diana's got a small case of the hiccups, so I'm going to try to provide a little cover here, though, and just talk for a little bit about why Diane is actually here. What some of you may or may not know, Diane and I have been friends for well over a decade at this point, and we actually met at a party arguing about uh, who was right in the 2006 comics event, The Civil War. Uh, Diane here is very pro Iron Man, very pro Tony Stark, and I was very pro Captain America. And we literally met because one of us overheard the other talking about how like Cap was wrong or Tony was right or Tony was wrong, and it just became a you're wrong, and then suddenly these two Marvel nerds are suddenly like uh, very vocally and vociferously kind of squaring off in this party, but also in a very kind of friendly and also a very respectful manner. And that's always been one of the reasons that Diane and I have stayed friends as long as we have, because even though we definitely disagree on some things within comic and within nerddom in general, but we've always been able to kind of oppose each other and still be like, okay, you make good points. I don't agree with you, but you make good points. And because of that, Diane is one of the very few people that I feel no shame in losing a Marvel trivia contest to, which I have done and which I still don't feel ashamed about. So,
I mean, to be fair, that was an Iron Man specific trivia contest. So there is that.
there is that. But yeah, no, I just I felt like this was a good place to kind of talk about that. I know we're in the middle of the news segment, but Diane and I go back and we go back through comics. We both read the comics. Have we both have our favorite characters. She loves Iron Man. I love Spider Man. And you know, I remember because we go and see a lot of the MCU movies together. And I remember coming out of Avengers Endgame, Diane was just disconsolate. Like she needed a hug, and you all know why. So, but yeah, no, you know, we've had a pretty good friendship, and I think it's got a pretty good basis. Wouldn't you say so, Diane?
I agree. Yeah, I don't think I stopped crying for 3 hours.
Yeah, it was tough. Yeah, that was a tough
Um,
one.
but yeah, I think we've definitely a very Marvel based friendship in the beginning.
Hmm.
Um, and I hope we didn't annoy everybody else at the party too much.
If they didn't screw 'em, or if we did screw them, whatever. Um, um, Diane and I have actually done a podcast together before. Actually, we this would probably be about 6 or 7 years ago. We actually were trying to do a podcast. We called it the Nowhere Fancast. It was ostensibly about the MCU, but we mostly did it about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We would do a review of each episode after it aired. And it only lasted for about a year due to different kind of external factors. But it's kind of nice to have you back doing a podcast with me, Diane. So
It's fun to be back.
next news item, and it's really nice because I've had a different news item each week for the upcoming video game Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the sequel to Marvel's Spider-Man from 2018, and the Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales game from 2020. And we got a release date. We got a release date. It is October 20th. I'm calling off work that day. I'm going to be playing the hell out of that game. Yes, I will live stream it. Come and watch me. That's going to happen. So, but yes, and pre-orders, because this was announced on, I think it was Thursday the 8th. Pre-orders start Friday, June 16th. And to answer any questions that anyone would have about this, of course, I'm going to pre-order it. I know some people are against video game pre-orders and DLC and all that stuff. Yeah, I kind of am, but I really want this game and all the bells and whistles that come with it, so I'm pre-ordering it. I want it. So excited for this game. So very excited. Um, have you seen any of the marketing material, Diane?
I've seen a little bit of the marketing material. You know, I have the 2018 game and I still haven't played it because you are fully aware of the issues around Diane playing video
Oh,
games.
and don't worry, we will get to that later in the podcast. I promise you.
Um,
Um, I,
I will
I,
say that I don't have a problem with pre-orders. I have a problem with some of the other DLC stuff, but given that I do a lot of reading of indie publishers and stuff like that, pre-orders to me are that's a valid thing. It's saying I'm putting money up front to let you know, yes, I want this right away. And so I don't have a problem with pre-orders.
Okay. That's that's good to know. And I agree with you completely. That really to me is just like, I want this, I want it day one. Here's the money. Come on, you know? So
Yeah.
um no, I'm really excited to play this game. There's like a 12-minute uh gameplay trailer that exists for this game. If you haven't seen it,
hmm
oh my god, go see it. It's so good. Apparently you can switch off between Peter and Miles like at a moment's notice, which is I cannot wait to do that. They've apparently got shared and separate skill trees, like when you level them up. It's looking like it's going to be so much fun, and I'm so excited for this game. Like, I hope we have a news item on this game like every episode that I do this podcast, because
Until it's out.
I'm just gonna sit here and stand for it until we get it. So, actually, I think I'll take this opportunity to say that do you know who the voice of Venom is, Diane?
No, no, I don't.
Do you know who
Video game.
Tony Todd is?
The name is familiar.
Okay. Tony Todd is an actor. He's known, I think, primarily as the Candyman, like from the Candyman movies, basically.
Oh.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I know horror's not really your thing. And to be fair, I haven't actually seen the Candyman movies. I've seen like, I've seen posters, I've seen clips of it. I haven't actually watched the movies. But the reason I know Tony Todd is because I know him from Star Trek. He's also played Worf's brother Kern in The Next Generation
Ooh,
in Deep Space Nine. He's
I know
also,
Kern.
yeah, yeah. He's also played Old Man Jake Sisko in the Visitor, like one of the best DS9 episodes that's been made.
hmm
Um so he's got a very distinctive voice and a very distinctive presence. And so like during that teaser trailer when he said like when he spoke his line as Venom, like I caught it immediately and like the hairs on my back started to rise and I got really excited. Tony Todd, I actually follow him on Twitter. And you know about my recent issues with like Trouble and her like very nearly dying and needing surgery. Trouble is my cat. She's also an executive producer on the podcast. But she had a medical issue and I've gotten that taken care of. She's good. She's back to being a full-time cat and we're all very happy. But I'm still paying down the medical debt, which is going to be here for a while, which is fine. But Tony Todd on Twitter actually made a post about his cat. And so I liked the post. He made like a Catter Day post. And so I made a short video of Trouble and basically responded, hey, Trouble wants to get in on this action. So not only did he like that, but apparently he went through my Twitter feed. He found one of the thumbnails that I had put up asking for like donations for help with Trouble's medical bills and everything, and he retweeted it. And I'm like I was just so touched that he would do that. I was just like, oh my god, I love this man already. I mean, it didn't really like result in any like extra donations or anything, but just the thought of him doing that,
Trying.
taking the
Yeah.
time to go in there and take a look at my feed and doing that. I was very touched by it. And so Tony Todd, if you ever listen to or watch the live streams of this podcast, I just want to say thank you. That meant a lot to me. So, but it was just a beautiful gesture, you know? Okay, and I think that's going to be all for the news this week. Now, let's get into our deep dive on the original classic Spider-Man, Peter Benjamin Parker. I'll start with a very quick intro that I'm sure most of us will be pretty familiar with. As a young man, brilliant student, Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider and received superhuman abilities. Adopting a costumed persona, Peter at first uses his powers selfishly to make money and refuses to stop a robber at a pivotal moment. It ends up costing the life of his beloved Uncle Ben, causing Peter to rethink his views on the world. Now, as the superhero Spider-Man, he tries to save others to make up for his mistake. Diane. We're all familiar with this origin story, or some very similar version of it. It's been repeated, retold, reinterpreted many times in the comics, in television, and in film. What about it do you think makes it so enduring?
I think part of it is the simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell the entire fundamental origin story, as you just did, in just a few seconds. I think that in both the Across the Multiverse and in the other Spider-Verse movies, we've gotten the whole, okay, one more time, thing of how quickly you can go through this origin story. And I
Right.
think that simplicity and the very clear big beats of it make it iconic, make it very, you instantly know what you're dealing with, you instantly know where you're at. You could tell this origin story at this point in like 6 panels with no dialogue, and you'd know what you were dealing with already.
Because it's been imprinted on the popular culture so thoroughly, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think that part of what makes it so iconic is that at the time that he was helping to create the character, I think Stan Lee had seen enough superhero comics that dealt with just kind of like, you know, big classic superheroes with big classic superhero problems. And, you know, I think to that point there wasn't as much, or I don't know how much, but there wasn't as much emphasis on the out of costume lives for a lot of these superheroes, and I think that uh, one of Stan's desires was I wanted to, you know, he wanted to know more about what was going on in these, you know, in the hero's mind, in their lives, it, it, as opposed to just hearing or as opposed to just chronicling them beating up supervillains. And I don't know that that was exclusively how it was in comics at the time, but it seems like it was rare enough that, you know, he kind of went with this formula, and it proved to kind of be uh, somewhat of a lightning strike. It was, I mean, several if you want to count like the Fantastic Four and all of the other characters that he was coming up with at this time. But there was something really special about his desire to want to know what is going on behind the mask that I think really kind of informed that origin story. And it really, you know, it really seems to have worked. So it's I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's left its stamp on me. So, you know.
I mean, yeah, because also, Spider-Man is one of the very early Marvel characters.
Yes, yes, he
He's
is.
coming out. You said Fantastic Four. Also, the very first X-Men comics
Hmm.
are about that same time period. And again, the X-Men comics spend a significant amount. The early X-Men spend a significant amount of time not in costume. And I think you're right that this is part of Marvel's what made Marvel in the early days. And Spider-Man was a huge part of that. I think he was probably the breakout individual character for Marvel. All of Marvel's other early books that really did well, that really took off right away, were the team book.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
Spidey was, I think, the main one that was just like one person as opposed to a team that really took off out of those early Marvel ones. You know, Tony took a little bit longer to get going.
Right.
Uh, and so I think Peter really was that character. And he's younger. I really think that
Hmm.
his starting him out younger than the X-Men were also teenagers, but you know, there weren't the teenagers were sidekicks. They weren't the main hero at
Right.
that time period.
And Stan received pushback for that. I believe his editor told him that is a terrible idea. Who cares about them having money troubles? Who cares about you know their dramas, their love lives? And Stan was like, I think he was about to quit comic books, and I believe his wife told him, write the comic that you want to write. And so that's where we got Amazing Fantasy 15, which is where Spider-Man first appears. And then apparently the response to that story was so positive that his editor came back to him and said, Stan, do you remember that wonderful character that you talked about? I think we need to do a series about him. And it's really, I mean, it's really quite a funny story. I've actually heard Stan Lee tell that story. He does it way better than I do, but that's kind of the main beat of it right there. Like, he got pushback at first, and then when his formula worked, everybody was like, "Hey, how you doing? Let's work together," So it's really quite an amusing story that. Let's dig into the duality of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, his superhero persona. Spider-Man is a superhero, or vigilante, if you will, who wears a mask and therefore has a demarcation between his costumed and civilian life as Peter Parker. How well he maintains that division can, of course, be argued, but there's no denying that having a secret identity presents a challenge for him. Peter has to keep secrets from the people he's closest to. He faces distrust from potential allies because he wears a mask, and has difficulty balancing the demands of the two lives he lives. Diane, what are some of the most significant memories that you have of Peter having to balance his personal life, school, crime fighting, and everything else that comes with the mask?
Well, you know, one thing that always struck me when I was reading Spider-Man very early on or watching early Spider-Man cartoons as, you know, a kid and into my teenage years was, you know, I was in those GT programs that Peter was in, and I barely had time to sleep. So, it was like, it definitely speaks to that, and I think younger kids today, they're pressured to do more and more and more stuff. So I think it really does kind of fit into that, like, the overworked teenager, even when you haven't got a job, because you're just learning and doing so much. And I think that the Spider-Man comics really captured that very early on, which is a very relatable
And I think
aspect.
and I think that like one of the advantages of having 60 plus years of lore around one character is that you can revisit various aspects of this character and really explore them. And the whole like hides behind a mask thing, that's been explored several times in his clashes with J. Jonah Jameson. And I remember reading one issue of Ultimate Spider-Man where actually a reporter, I don't remember it, I don't think it was Betty Brant, but it was a reporter who caught him like just as he was about to run off, and basically said, "Wait, don't you want to answer some questions?" And Peter was like, I mean, not really. And she's like, well, why do you wear a mask? And like he actually takes the time to say, well, I mean, I got people that I love that don't know I'm Spider-Man, and my enemies could target them. And so I really like that, and I really like the kind of early days of dealing with that duality, like when he would stand up his friends that he was going to meet to go out because like a police car rushed by and he had to go help them out, and they just think Peter's being stuck up. And Peter's like, no, I really want to be friends with you, and I really want to hang out, and it's just like, the duality helps create the kind of the iconic Parker luck, the oh God, any difficulty that Peter can have, he will get. So you could kind of, I mean, you could make the argument, well, you're bringing that upon yourself. You're living two lives here. Which Doctor Strange kind of gets him for in No Way Home. So,
And that's a classic costumed superhero issue, and the secret identity issue. And there's a million comics, including Civil War itself, that largely wrestle back and forth with the idea of, are you actually doing anybody any real favors? Are you actually protecting anybody? Is having a secret identity actually a good idea?
right.
Like, it's a mainstay of the genre, but is it in the end actually a good idea to do that?
Is it practical? Is it worth it? Are you creating more problems by doing so?
Like, on the one hand, if your friends and family, you don't tell them, they're not going to be worried, and they don't know, so they can't let it slip. They don't know, so hopefully if nobody knows, then they're not a target. On the other hand, if they don't know, then they don't know they might be a target. They can't take those precautions.
Right.
If nobody else knows who can protect them, because they don't know this person needs protecting. So it kind of goes. It's definitely a core question of the genre, because it is, and Peter is one of the ones who I think that question gets dealt with more frequently and more in depth than a lot of the other Marvel characters get that question dealt with.
Oh yeah.
I think he gets a lot of the, oh well, your friends think you're stuck up, or think you're a flake. He gets a lot of that as well. And I think they all get kind of that aspect, but he gets a lot more of the, is this even helping questions.
Right. Yes. No, I definitely agree with you there. And that duality, I mean, again, we've had 60 plus years worth of stories to kind of, come back to that question and explore it from different angles with different spider people and so on and so forth. And I mean, it's just kind of a it's kind of one of those things that makes the character, I feel, as iconic as it is him trying to maintain that balance. I like to use the phrase "strike a balance," and I feel like that's partially due to this character and this trait about him. Let's talk about some of the major storylines that Peter has had to deal with. There have been a number of famous storylines that have tested Peter Parker and allowed for significant growth of his character. From showing his sheer force of will in If This Be My Destiny to the insanity that was the Clone Saga, Peter has been put through the ringer on a number of occasions by a number of different writers, editors, and costume supervillains, leaving fans with strong opinions about the direction this character has taken. Diane, what storylines stand out the most for you with regard to Peter Parker's development?
Um, for me, I think there are some later storylines that I could talk about.
That is
But
A-okay.
in terms of the earlier storylines, I think it's less the individual storylines and more the commonalities between a lot of the really great ones.
Okay.
One of the things that always struck me in terms of Peter Parker storylines, like when you read it, it was like, this is a Peter Parker story. Had to do with the emotional connections that he has with most of his rogues gallery.
Very true.
That's so iconically Peter. Um, you know, I love Tony, but with the exception of Obadiah Stane, pretty much all of his villains are just they might have been emotionally connected to somebody else that he was connected to, but for the most part, they're just villains. Peter's villains are always turn out to be people he cares about. And it makes that whole like superheroes don't kill thing into a whole new level, because it's not just superheroes don't kill, it's this is my best friend's dad. Or this is my best friend, and he's clearly gone off the rails, but this is still somebody I fundamentally care about. And he can't ever see his villains as evil and black and white as many other superheroes do as a standard,
Right.
white hat, black hat, good guy, bad guy. And in Peter's situation, all these are people he cares about. They're people that he knows them as human beings, again, behind the mask.
And I feel like Peter's, I mean, like, the reason he lost his uncle and ended up becoming who he eventually became was because he kind of had the attitude of, screw the rest of the world. Like, I'm gonna protect my Aunt May and my Uncle Ben. Everyone else can go to heck because no one ever treated me well. And I feel like because that caused his uncle's death, you basically he's kind of learned to, like, okay, wow, that went disastrously, and so he's kind of had to learn to care a little bit more. But he really seems to have taken that lesson to heart and brings it in, which is why he tries to care about his villains beyond just beating them up. You could make the argument that he doesn't really have any kind of big relationship with, say, Doc Ock. But Doc Ock is very much who Peter could have been if he had continued down the path that he had started on when he first got his powers. And so, like, there's just that, like, it's funny because I have a list of some of, like, the big major story arcs that at least stood out to me, and it's really telling to me. Eventually I'll do an episode on this, but it's really telling to me that when I chose this list, like, three of those stories each contained one of the supervillains that at least I probably most fans consider to be his top three nemesis. If This Be My Destiny, that was a Doc Ock story. Peter had been going after someone called the Master Planner. It turned out to be Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus trapped him under a bunch of debris. He didn't think he could lift it. Then he kind of thought about how life would be with, like, for his Aunt May without him. And so he finds, like, the will to lift it up. It's a moment that's beautifully homaged in Spider-Man Homecoming. The night Gwen Stacy died, which is, that story is huge for a number of reasons, but that's a Green Goblin story right there. And then you have just straight up Venom, just the emergence of Eddie Brock as Venom. And that story itself just gives me chills because, each of those stories puts Peter through the ringer in a different way. Like, the If This Be My Destiny is Peter, like, finding the strength to carry on even though he doesn't, he feels like he actually might be defeated. the night Gwen Stacy died was about basically showing, well, we'll get into that issue in a little bit, but showing restraint in the face of a very evil action that the Green Goblin committed. And then Venom was just living under the threat of that action in very kind of up close and personal terms that really kind of drove Peter to, like one edge basically. So,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, lots of amazing stories that have come out. I don't know. What did you think of Dying Wish? That's the one where Doc Ock switches bodies with Peter right before he becomes the superior Spider-Man. Did you read that one?
I didn't actually. I need
Okay.
to. I read a lot of the Superior Spider-Man stuff that came after
Well,
that, but I
and
didn't
that's
actually.
that's up there too. Yeah, like that's
Yeah, and
good stuff.
that I I'm really sad that again, as they so often do because of the eternal now of comics,
Right.
they've walked so much of the growth that happened from that arc back, which is just sad.
Yes.
Um, and that is a besetting sin for Peter Parker writers, that you'll have some great arcs that have some great movement forward and really interesting character growth, and then but they keep wanting to go back to who the character used to be and do classic Peter stories that the character growth he's had in a previous story don't allow, so they do some truly phenomenally stupid things to reset the character back to where they want him to be one day more.
One More Day. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's actually I hate it, but it's up there with the big impact stories for Peter Parker because it is, it's a huge impact. I was never a fan of the marriage, but I was an even bigger critic of how they ended it. Like,
Yeah.
why? Why would you do that? Um, but yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I will never forgive that story is because it effectively erases. Um, I mean, I guess it doesn't erase it because I still have that comic and I can always go and revisit it. But like that moment doesn't exist for this Peter anymore,
Yeah.
where as a not as a result of Civil War. This all happened before Civil War, but um, J. Michael Straczynski introduced Morlun, and Morlun proved to be a very different kind of foe, one of the real threats for Peter. And Peter beat him, but like basically he was a battered and bloodied mess at the time. He had to take a bunch of painkillers afterward and just kind of collapse on his bed. And while he did that, Aunt May came and visited and saw him like in his Spider-Man costume and all bandaged up and everything. And that led to them talking about him being Spider-Man. And there
Hmm.
was that was such a beautiful conversation. There's this one panel where Peter is just so happy that he doesn't have to keep any secrets from her anymore, that he like deliriously kind of grabs her and lifts her up and he's like, "Do you know how awesome this is?" And Aunt May's like, "Yes, this is wonderful. Now please put me down." And it's one of those beautiful moments that One More Day erased. Just
Hmm.
no one knows who he is anymore. And it's just like, I really hate that you took that away, but yeah, I mean, like, so many storylines where I think I mentioned the insanity of the Clone Saga. Dear God, have you read that?
It's been a minute, but yeah,
Don't.
and finding out later that it was never intended to be that long, that it sold well, so they made him write more of it long beyond after
It
what he had
lasted for
plotted, which
like,
becomes
yeah, it was
so
like two
obvious.
years or something. It was like 2 years
Yeah.
of this stuff. Don't do
Yeah, and it
that.
was supposed to be like 6 issues.
Yeah, yeah. No, guys, no. If anyone revisits I know the Clone Saga has been revisited a couple of times, and so far it's apparently like they've learned their lesson. They're like two, three issue story, and we're done. But like, man, that it went on. Now, I mean, we did get Ben Riley out of this. We did get Kane. You know,
Hmm.
so there were some silver linings, but like like they just did not know how to end it, and it showed, and it was just like, wow, what are you guys doing?
Because they made him take the ending and chuck it and keep going way longer. And I think
Yes.
that is one of the besetting sins of something the size of Marvel in general. And editorial intervention where it's not needed
Right.
can frequently be a problem of this massive system.
No, I agree with you. And I mean, it raises the question of how much a corporate entity like Marvel or DC or what have you can actually allow their characters to develop. I mean,
Hmm.
again, these aren't real people. These are intellectual properties. They can keep them alive as long as they want. They can keep them young as long as they want, and they do. And of course, that makes certain things like legacy and passing on the mantle like a little less believable than it is, say, in a movie where you actually have to deal with actors who age and things like that. So, you know, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things, and a lot of these storylines they reflect it. Some of
Hmm.
them are really good at raising different aspects of the same trait, and some of them are just we're going crazy, kind of thing. So,
Hmm.
all right, let's move on to relationships. One of the key aspects of Peter Parker's character involves the relationships he has with the people closest to him. Key characters such as Aunt May, Mary Jane Watson, Gwen Stacy, Harry Osborn, J. Jonah Jameson, and many others have helped shape Peter in both his regular life and his time as a costumed superhero. These relationships have had a these relationships have had a profound impact on his character development, decision making, and motivations for his dual lives. Diane, when the subject of Peter's relationships comes up, which characters come to mind for you, and which characters and situations involving them are the most significant to you?
I think when you say Peter Parker and his relationships, the first thing that's always going to come to mind is going to be May, because his relationship with Aunt May is so foundational. Even if you take her away, um, that still is the foundational relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am also a big fan of his relationships and interactions with other superheroes. Fan of the team books. I'm a fan of the team up. So I think that the relationship that he has as a superhero with other heroes, like the very close relationship that he frequently has with Johnny Storm and with the entirety of the Fantastic Four, having briefly joined them. The relationship that he has with both Iron Man and Captain America
Mm-hmm.
uh, when he's during the times where he's an Avenger, and the fact that when he's in a team book, he is frequently one of the characters that is very cognizant of the relationships between the other people in the team and will make note of those things, will bring them up to other characters, will even make other characters talk when they're fighting.
Yeah, no, he totally will. He totally will. I and it's funny because I actually will be raising the question of relationships with superheroes in a moment here.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think that for me, Aunt May, of course, is huge. He's been dealing with her for 60 years, like he's had her to lean on. He's had to take care of her. There's been a lot of growth there. And really, I find that it is refreshing and I dare say long overdue that in some media they are actually taking the bold they're making the bold choice to actually kill off her character. They of course they did that in Spider-Man No Way Home. Spoilers for a 2-year-old movie. Um, but they also did it before that. They did it in the Marvel's Spider-Man game, the 2018 game.
Hmm.
May actually ends up dying at the end of that game. And in what I'm pretty sure is a deliberate show of synergy, on May's tombstone in the game, it says, when you help someone, you help everyone. And that same phrase is on May's tombstone in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Hmm.
And I mean, I feel like this goes back to the situation of Marvel, never truly letting its characters just grow in terms of just like growing old, growing out of the role, dying, stuff like that. Um, I don't know that we're ever going to actually really see Aunt May die in the comics, She's been around 60 years. She was not a young woman when the comics started. It can be argued that she looks younger than she did, back in her initial story. But that relationship is of course key to Peter's development, and I just like the idea that at least in some medias it has changed over time.
I think one of the things is they've changed. I remember when I first saw Aunt May, I thought she must have been his great aunt, because she was originally portrayed like, I thought this was an 80-year-old woman,
Hmm.
not someone in her like late 50s, early 60s at best. And you know, I think some of that is just people in their 50s now didn't grow up in the Depression. And
Right. Yeah. No. No. There are reasons for that, and I
um,
accept that. But
I think it's interesting because the fact that they actually keep making her younger changes the relationship a lot, from her being a caregiver, but someone clearly in not just the sense of a you're a civilian in a superhero world, so of course you need rescuing all the time because you're a civilian in a superhero world, but like they used to portray her as so frail.
yes, yes, they
And
did.
as the media gets, she's now more and more, portrayed as just an adult, and she does stuff. She never used to do things.
She
She was
she's
always at home waiting for Peter.
she's more like a mother these days than a grandmother. I would
Mhm.
say,
Yeah.
and yeah, no, and that change is of course definitely going to affect how Peter is portrayed.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah,
Yeah.
I want to delve a little bit into Peter's other relationships, such as Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy and Harry, who you could basically make the argument that those were his college age friends. Those were the ones
Mhm.
that he went out partying with, when he didn't get called away by Spider-Man. Um, and there's been a lot of development for all three of those individuals. Even though one of them, her life was very savagely curtailed by the Green Goblin, she had a beautiful pop culture resurrection about what 10 years ago, when we got
Mhm.
Spider Gwen, and people were just like, "What if she was bitten instead of Peter?" Oh God, I love that shirt. That is an excellent shirt. Diane is for those of you who will be listening to this. Diane is wearing a gray shirt with a Spider Gwen silhouette on it. It's really nice. So, um, but essentially, like Harry, who was Peter's put upon best friend. He was a rich kid who couldn't get his dad's affection, and eventually he developed a drug problem, and uh, he ended up donning the persona of the Green Goblin when he found out Peter's secret identity because it just drove him over a cliff. And even he has had his redemption. He's been brought back to the side of good. We've got MJ. She's the one that consoled him after Gwen's death. She eventually became his wife. They were actually married in the comics for about 25 years, something like that. Maybe
Had
20
a
years.
kid.
Had a kid in an alternate reality. We're going to get to that. And, and it's just like, I could do an entire podcast on Peter's like love life. I kind of don't want to at any point in the near future. But there
And
the
Felicia.
right. But you could you know Peter's friendships and his romantic relationships, of course, have had a big impact on who he is as a character. The fact that they intertwine so much with his costume persona really is just kind of one of those, like, I don't know. I feel like it's one of those, like, we see this trope all the time. We see it in Batman. We see it in The Flash. It always seems to come up, but it really feels like this. Even if it wasn't the genesis of that trope, it was done in a way that really played up the kind of soap opera-esque qualities of Peter's civilian life. And I feel like they've continued to do that even with some of his like more modern relationships and friendships and stuff like that. Do you ever like if you read a comic, I remember reading one comic, I think it focused almost exclusively on Betty Brant, who used to date Peter and now they're friends and everything. And it was a good story, but I remember reading it and I'm like, I mean, this is nice. This is a nice look into this character. Um, but there was almost no Spider-Man in it. Like it was all told from Betty Brant's viewpoint. Um, do you like those kinds of stories?
Occasionally, I think it's always interesting because we spend so much time in our main character's head
Right.
and in their perspective. I think sometimes it is useful to get or interesting to get that step back and see the character from specifically from somebody else's perspective and see the world that the character is inhabiting, um, especially like in a superhero comic when you get somebody who is essentially a civilian perspective on this world. um, so I think that every once in a while they're interesting. I'm not sure that Betty Brant's perspective is one that I necessarily would have felt like I needed. I think maybe like a comic from MJ's perspective would have been
I mean,
more
but there are so
interesting.
many of those, you know.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
I feel
I
like
I haven't seen any recently, I guess.
the Harry Osborn friendship and everything. Like I'll be very surprised if MCU Peter Parker ever has
Mhm.
a best friend Harry Osborn. I think that's going to be Ned. But I feel like the
Yeah.
Harry Osborn relationship and the dynamic is going to eventually inform how that friendship goes and some of the
Yeah,
things that will end up happening.
I think I really do think that in the next MCU film, there's a strong possibility of who does Ned become without Peter around, and how does Ned retcon his reality without Peter. The possibility of that being a gateway to him becoming some kind of supervillain is definitely possible and definitely fits with Peter's luck.
Right.
I think that, the last couple of movie attempts at Harry Osborn haven't worked overly well, in my opinion. And I'm not really sure why that is. Because I don't think there's anything inherent about the character that would make it play so bad on screen, but it just has. And so I don't think we've gotten a good movie interpretation of that character and that relationship. I think the chemistry has always just fallen a little flat compared to what you get on the page.
I mean, I feel
And
like for the most part, like the James Franco one was decent. Like, it wasn't like Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's chemistry or anything like
mhm.
that. But like, I feel like James Franco did a pretty good, like, I want my daddy's approval. I'm a little jealous that he likes Peter. So like I got some of that and I felt some of that. I feel like it kind of went over, like it went over the top in the third installment. But like they had to condense so much of that history because like they were I'm pretty sure they knew they were making the last movie at that point. But like, yeah, I understand. There's no like, oh my God, I love that relationship. Like you can say that more about Ned's relationship with Peter,
Yeah.
in the movies. So um of similar importance are Spider-Man's relationship with other heroes, vigilantes, and even uniformed law enforcement. Costumed heroes such as Daredevil, the Human Torch, Wolverine, and even Deadpool have informed his experience as a superhero. What are some of the more memorable superhero relationships you can think of for Peter Parker, and what do they mean to you? And I'm smiling because I know Diane will probably enjoy the heck out of answering this question.
Well, I mean, okay, obviously the mentor relationship that's frequently a thing with Tony is always going to be a big deal for me. I know that there are, especially among younger people, a lot of people who are not happy with that relationship. Um, and especially in how it played out in the movies, because some thought that it overshadows who Peter is on his own. Um, I really love that relationship in the comics, and the relationship equally with Cap.
Yeah.
The Peter calling them mom and dad repeatedly. Um, I can remember one about post Civil War, what after they're starting to make up, and him making a comment about nobody likes it when mom and dad are fighting. Um,
I love that.
and I also his relationship with Johnny Storm is just so much fun. These two teenage idiots, uh, one of whom is brilliant but still an idiot.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And the other one who's pretty much just an idiot. Egging each other on into sometimes somewhat questionable decisions.
I love, like, I remember reading one issue of, I think it was Amazing Spider Man, or maybe it was Fantastic Four, where they're basically just being roommates for an issue, like sharing an
Hmm.
apartment, and just like, one eats the other's cereal and the other leaves a mess. And, it's just like, and it's kind of like perfect odd couple chemistry, which is a lot of
Yeah.
fun. I really enjoy uh I really enjoy Spider-Man's occasional on again off again friendship with Daredevil.
Hmm.
Um they're both street level superheroes. Depending on who's writing it, one may be older and more experienced than the other or what have you. But they generally do a good job of one, hating the kingpin together, two, just kind of good naturedly getting on each other's nerves, hey, I need you to do this. You need to do this for me. Please do this. No, I need you to do this. Seriously. Come on, do that. And they both know they're just screwing around with each other, but they're getting the thing done. And I really like that about them because they have both a friendship and they have a decent working relationship, and I think that's really fun to watch whenever they do portray it.
And then you throw Deadpool into that
Oh
mix
God.
with Team Red, and absolute chaos ensues. You know, the the amount of interaction with Deadpool has definitely increased significantly in the comics in the last, you know, it's just been on a steady upswing.
I mean, at
There
this
is
point, I'm hoping that Ryan Reynolds and Tom Holland share the screen.
I really, really would love to see that. There's a certain obvious fan reaction to the two of them sharing the screens, one way, one way or the other.
I
Um,
know, I know.
I love, but I do love the sort of like Peter is usually in the comics when they're on the page together. You have the sort of Peter is kind of stands at the middle point with Daredevil on this end and Deadpool on this end.
That's a good
And
point.
when Peter is interacting with Daredevil, he's the like goofy, cutting up, doing weird shit guy, and Daredevil is sort of the let's just get this done guy. And when
Right.
he's on the screen with Deadpool, you can almost see Peter going, "Oh God, this is what Daredevil feels like." um, and so it's interesting. I think that's one of the things that his interactions with other superheroes and and anti-heroes. Um, when you put one character in contrast with another character like that, it really highlights where that the core of that character, because you can see his goofy side in contrast to somebody even more serious, and his serious side in contrast to someone more goofy. You can
Right.
see his where his lines are in contrast to somebody who doesn't share them.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, on the other hand, close working relationships with police, such as Gene DeWolf, George Stacy, Yuri Watanabe, and others, have helped him with his street level cases as well as his public image battle against J. Jonah Jameson's Daily Bugle. Diane, Spider Man's occasional working relationship with the police, while a matter of historical narrative, is a little more of a fraught situation in today's socio-cultural climate. Which relationships with the police do you remember for Peter as Spider Man, and what obstacles make such a relationship more difficult in the here and now? Oh, and it looks like we might have lost Diane for a second there. Give me just a moment. All right, Diane, are you there? Uh-oh, Diane, I don't seem to be able to hear you. Hold on one second, everybody. We got a minor technical difficulty here. Let's just see what is going on. All right. We're gonna need a second here. I think Diane's PC may have given out, And we're going to need just a moment to fix that. When we do, we'll come back to the question and we'll resume the podcast. But for a moment, let's just go ahead and take care of that. So while Diane is working on her technical issue, I want to talk to you guys for a few minutes about why I chose to do a Spider-Man podcast when there are lots of them out there already. Spider-Man means a lot to me. I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys that. And give me just a second here. My very earliest memory of Spider-Man is from when I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. And what I remember, because a lot of people ask me, why do you like Spider-Man so much? For those of you who can't see me, I'm wearing a Spider-Man compression shirt right now. I usually try to wear a different one for each episode of the podcast. But what, like, I think this is an Andrew Garfield Spider-Man compression shirt. But what I remember as a child watching, I believe it was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, is people, sorry, I'm all over the place here. Wasn't ready for a tech problem. So people ask why I like him so much. They're like, do you like his powers? Do you like, and he's got a very cool set of powers. Do you like the drama? Do you, what is it? Why Spider-Man? Why do you identify with him so much? And you could say that there is a lot to it because Peter is he is a gifted young man. He is, he had some social difficulties growing up. And, oh, Diane, are you there? Hold on. I see you, but I can't hear you. Hold on. I'm just double checking my settings. I am so sorry. I cannot hear you. All right. No, you're not muted. I think it goes without saying that this portion of the podcast may get edited. All right. Let me see. All right. Okay, so Diane is still attempting to fix her connection issue. Anyways, what I've usually told people is that what intrigues me about Peter Parker is the power and responsibility storyline. That lesson was always very powerful to me, even as a young child. And what I remember is an episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends where, okay, hold on, I'm being asked to drop the call. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then we're going to see if Diane can call me back. Hello?
Hello?
I can hear you. Can hear you again. Is everything okay?
I think we got it on this end.
Okay. All right.
Sorry about that, everyone.
That is fine. These things happen, and you have the distinction, Diane, of being the first kind of like fairly major technical difficulty on this podcast. So before we jump back into it, I'm going to finish off my little story I was telling to distract people.
Sure.
But essentially the first thing that I remember seeing was an episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I believe Spider-Man's Aunt May was laid up after a battle with one supervillain, and Peter is very distraught about the whole thing. Iceman and Firestar are trying to talk to him. They want, they're trying to buck him up, and he basically tells them his origin story at that point. And I think this was a point where the show had been on for like 2 or 3 years at this point, and he'd never delved into his origin story. And so, like, I remember watching that origin story as a kid. Again, I could not have been older than like 4 or 5 at the time. And he talks about, hey, when I got these spider powers from the spider bite, I didn't care about the rest of the world, so I just tried to make money. And when this robber ran by me, I didn't stop him. And then when that robber shot my Uncle Ben, I went and, I tracked him down, and then I saw his face and I realized it was the same man. And ever since then I've tried to be a better person. I've tried to save others since I couldn't save my Uncle Ben. And again, I remember as a 5-year-old, I remember going, whoa, that is deep. That is some serious stuff. And so, that is probably why I like Spider-Man so much. That is why I really want to, that's what's brought me into doing a podcast about Spider-Man. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I may edit this part out. I might not. I don't know. We'll see. So I'm kind of playing things by ear here. So with that in mind, Diane, welcome back.
Thank you.
And let me see. I think when we lost you, we were getting onto the topic of Spider-Man, and his relationship with the police. Am I right
Yes.
about that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to go right to the question, or if you like, I could do the lead in. How much of it did you hear?
Let's. I think we were on just about at the question.
Okay. So Spider-Man's occasional working relationship with the police, while a matter of historical narrative, is a little more of a fraught situation in today's socio-cultural climate. Which relationships with the police do you remember for Peter as Spider-Man, and what obstacles make such a relationship more difficult in the here and now?
I mean, it goes back and forth all the time in the comics and in the other media, whether the cops are after him or whether he's got like the one guy or the one or two guys that he can actually talk to. And you know this is one of those things where superheroes in general fit into an odd place culturally speaking,
Oh, yeah.
where the current police situation is concerned. Um, I would say that right now, I think that if you're going to write a good superhero story, you do kind of need to have if you're going to have a superhero story that doesn't fall afoul of some of your police issues, then you need to have a superhero who is skeptical of the police and whom the police are skeptical of. I think Spider-Man fits really well into being in that position. I think that's not historically been quite where he was, because historically he has not been skeptical of the police. The police have been skeptical of him, but he's not been skeptical of them.
Right.
And I think that's where I think the interesting storytelling can be right now, is to have a Peter who is more skeptical of the police and is looking at the necessity of his role in protecting the community, not just from the traditional threats of the supervillains, but from bad policing.
Very true. There was a bit of controversy from the 2018 Spider-Man video game because of Spider-Man's uh, relationship with Yuri Watanabe. detective who, he's the, or she's the policeman that he is helping at this point in his life that he's working with. He also helps out Miles Morales' dad, Jefferson, but um, spoiler for a video game, but in that game, Jefferson unfortunately ends up dying. Um, so there's this whole thing with Spider-Man and police captains, which was kind of touched on in Across the Spider-Verse too, where they, with their canon events and everything. But it's interesting because back in the 60s, and I think it was just generally assumed that cops, law enforcement, they were the good guys. That why wouldn't a superhero want to work with them? And so you had that happening in a lot of those types of stories. And nowadays, there's a lot more pushback because a lot of people, with social media, with mobile recording technology and everything like that, it's it's not so black and white anymore. There's a whole lot of gray and dirty gray and dark grays going on that people are starting to see, and so it's a lot easier to become skeptical of that kind of, like, well, yeah, maybe we shouldn't just take it for granted that that all cops are great people. And I'm saying this not out of disrespect for law enforcement. For the most part, I I find law enforcement, at least in my experience, which is not the same experience that other people have had. I've generally had good interactions with them, but I think that it is important to keep in mind that in the last decade and a half or so, um, the institution of the police itself has just become something of a cultural controversy. And so there were people that had some really strong feelings about seeing Spider-Man essentially working with the cops and wanting to be Spider Cop, as he kept saying during the game. So I feel that's a very um, interesting topic to delve into, and I think probably the most realistic modern interpretation so far has been with well, there are two. I'll go with two. One is Vin Gonzalez. Do you know who he is, Diane?
No, I think that's an arc I haven't read.
Okay, Vin Gonzalez appeared in the Brand New Day saga shortly after One More Day. And
Okay.
he basically was a young cop who became friends with Peter, and they became roommates, and they got along really well, at least at first. But Vin Gonzalez was very convinced that Spider-Man was a criminal and worked with some of the police to basically frame Spider-Man for murder. And of course, Peter is his roommate. And so, and it was a really interesting depiction of, I mean, one, corrupt cops, they do exist, but also, you know, from Vin's point of view, like, all he had ever known was that Spider-Man was a bad person and Spider-Man was a criminal. He kind of drank the J. Jonah Jameson Kool-Aid, so to speak. And so he thought he was doing a good thing, and he ended up paying the price for it. I think he eventually got sent to prison and everything. But
Hmm.
but yeah, it was kind of one of those yikes. Like, that's unfortunate, but definitely had an effect on Peter. I would also say his relationship with George Stacy in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies,
Hmm.
because his relationship with George Stacy goes back to the 70s, like when, but like this newer interpretation from about 10 years ago showed a cop who was very skeptical of Spider-Man. And even when he runs afoul of his secret identity, he's still skeptical, but he at least is willing to give him a chance, And I think we've got two kind of like opposing. I don't know. I don't know if it's opposing, but there are certain oppositional elements in those two stories that are still fairly modern in terms of, this is how Peter as Spider-Man is relating to the police that he either has to work with or has to oppose. And
Hmm.
any thoughts on that? Or
I mean, yeah, I think that bringing in that idea, that story arc with the cops that are framing him is this one's a little bit hard for me to do on a sort of even keel because I do have very strong opinions.
I know you do.
So I'm trying to keep it to a certain level. I think that it does highlight again, like you have to keep it to a certain level unrealistic.
Yes,
Um, be not
because it
just
is
because
fiction.
yeah, not and because quite frankly, if you were to get too realistic, you would end up with the situation of Spider-Man's evidence is all inadmissible. Like
Yeah,
it kind of breaks the
exactly.
whole superhero trope when you actually start looking at legal precedent and things like chain of
Right,
custody and all of that.
right.
Um, so you have to keep it to a certain extent, a few steps back and a few steps fantasy, which allows it to exist where you can tell a story without and without having to confront too directly certain realities because they clearly don't actually apply in this fantasy universe.
And you're correct, and I think that makes plenty of sense. I mean, you know, viewers, readers, video game players, they like a certain amount of verisimilitude in their storytelling. Makes plenty of sense. You like to imagine that you could exist in this world if you really wanted to. But the
Hmm.
reality is that this is fiction. There is a certain amount of distance that necessarily needs to be there in order to really kind of explore um, these storylines and these arcs and these narratives. So that makes plenty of sense, and I think we're going to go ahead and move on to Peter's evolution in comics, TV, video games, and movies. Um,
Sorry about that. That's a work thing. I can't turn it off, but it should stop quickly.
that's fine. That's fine. Peter Parker has had a noteworthy transformation throughout his 60 plus years in the comics medium. From an artistic standpoint alone, Peter has gone from an awkward, almost nebbish teenager to the kind of good looking male lead you'd expect to see in a romance comic. As he's grown in his career as a superhero, he's gone from self absorbed vigilante to a dependable, at times inspiring superhero for other young heroes, with, of course, some regressions and redevelopments as writers change hands on the character. And I know we've talked a little bit about this already, Diane, but what changes has this character undergone in the comics that are the most significant to you?
Growing up. Um, no, I mean, I say that like literally starting from a character who's in high school to then getting a majority of story arcs where he's in college to getting story arcs of him attempting to actually have an adult life one way or another, um, vacillating wildly on it. One of the things I think in his growth that the various writers have a really hard time agreeing on is, he's supposed to be one of the Marvel geniuses, one of the smartest characters in the Marvel universe, and he has high level contacts all over the place, and yet somehow, like, he never until Doc Ock steps in and starts a company under his name, he doesn't really do the things that you would expect a super genius with lots of connections to be able to do.
Oh yeah.
But I do think that, like, yeah, one of the main evolutions I see in him as a character is just that as they age him up incrementally and backwards, watching this iconic character go from essentially an older child, but a child, to a fully realized adult.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, I have my issues with certain Spider-Man writers and editors. But I will say that there are some, and I mean, others have pointed this out to me. There are some that did really good. They did a really good job of writing Peter as a married man, or as just Peter as an adult, essentially. And it makes it all the more infuriating when they backpedal. And I understand that, again, these characters are probably going to be eternally youthful. And that just presents certain problems when you have writers changing hands on them, because, one writer might have been a fan of the bumbling man-child Peter when he was growing up and reading comics, and he wants to go back to that. But that's really jarring after Peter has, led superhero groups and helped inexperienced superheroes get better at what they do, So, I agree that is just kind of a big issue from time to time that we just kind of have to perennially deal with. I mean, for my part, I think that, just seeing Peter grow and develop as a person and think more outside of kind of his immediate wants and needs and his way of seeing the world, I think that's often helped him grow as a character. And it's something I really would like to see more of and more consistently. As to whether or not we'll get that, probably not. But, like it, Peter Parker, like, I don't know, like the captains in Star Trek, like, like a lot of popular characters, they're part of our modern mythology. And so they're going to get reinterpreted, and they're going to get rewritten, and they're going to revisit certain topics. And so there's going to be a certain amount of cyclical development. And for better or worse, that's just kind of what we have to deal with. But the issue, the times when Peter grows and grows beyond himself are the things that I really like the most about when he changes.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things I wish that they would embrace a little bit more is just not, if you want to write that older story, just write it, and don't try to force just say, this is a story from 6 years ago, from earlier in Peter's life.
Yeah.
And just say, I'm just going to write a story from then, instead of trying to, like, but then, of course, then you can't fit it into whatever big event is happening or whatever. But I feel like I like to see them, because I think there's lots to do with the younger versions of the characters. I just wish they would I think comics, because of their eternal now, needs to also just get a little more comfortable with just going, well, yes, there's the eternal now, and there's also the eternal then, and I'm writing in the eternal then.
I like that idea, actually. I like that a lot.
So you can preserve growth without giving up the opportunity to tell the older stories.
Well, and I think with the onset of the multiverse now, like, it's really easy to just say, okay, well, this is Peter in this multiverse, If I want to write a story, I keep bringing this up on the podcast episodes. If I want to film Craven's Last Hunt with, like, a 30 to 40-year-old Peter Parker, like, go ahead and do that and just be like, this is Peter in this multiverse dealing with Craven at this age, you know? Like,
Hmm.
I think that could be cool. Um, who knows if we'll get it, but hopefully we will. So, um, in television, Peter's portrayal both in and out of costume starts out closer to a classical leading man superhero with a deep, confident voice and classic physique and presentation, and over time gradually grows to embrace his youthful origin, complete with his insecurities, naivete, and even some adolescent body image issues. There are varying degrees of on screen focus on his origin story with Uncle Ben and the spider bite, some of which have been handled very subtly. Diane, first of all, how familiar are you with the TV shows? And what have you noticed about Peter's development between television shows? Do you have a favorite Spider-Man TV show?
Um, I think my favorite one is actually one you're not real fond of.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Which one?
which would be oh, and now it's not the current one, but the one I think 2 ago, it might have been Ultimate, but it was not
I was
I mean, it wasn't Miles, it was Peter.
Yeah, I was not terribly excited about Ultimate Spider-Man, but that's fine. Go ahead.
What I liked about that one, was the playfulness that was very much a part of that whole series. That whole series was very kind of fun and playful. There was a lot that I didn't like about it as well. The team dynamic was not the best I'd ever seen. Um but I liked I thought it did a really good job of the teenager. In terms of the school superhero balance.
Mm-hmm.
Now they did take out a complicating factor to that by making an Aunt May who was just always gone, always off doing something, so
Okay.
that there was less trying to like justify shit to May. So we took out that complicating factor. Of course, we added a complicating factor of having other of putting him in a team pretty much right from the beginning. But then again, I'm a sucker for a team, so I think that's probably one of the reasons I liked that one. But I like I am a fan of Peter who's being at his quippiest.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's my favorite Spider-Man is definitely Snarky Man. Um,
There's always a quip quota with Spider-Man. He has to be at least X quippy in order for us to accept him as Spider-Man. So
yeah.
I mean I get that. I don't think I always agree with it, but I do get it, you know. So, um, yeah, I mean, my favorite Spider-Man TV show at this point is Spectacular Spider-Man, and I'm always going to be upset that they left it on the cliffhanger that they did. I mean, I guess it was resolved, but there were still loose ends that needed to be addressed, and you never find out what happened between him and Gwen, although I'm sure you can guess. Um, but I really really liked how it was a good, like, here are the big kind of keystone events throughout Spider-Man history, and they were kind of reinterpreted for what was then the modern day, and they occurred, like, in a different order, but they still all happened. And I really did enjoy that. I guess I've noticed that it goes on. They keep trying to make Peter younger, you know. And and again, I get it. I'm very happy that they made, like, Tobey Maguire was a fine Spider-Man. He was a fine Peter Parker. But he very clearly was not a teenager at the time those movies were made. Whereas when you get to Tom Holland, he was what, 20, 19 or 20 when those were shot, and he looked like a baby basically. And so I was
He was
down
20
for
when the
that.
first one was shot, and he looked like he was about 12.
Yeah. And I'm good with all of that. Um I guess I just kind of like a certain middle ground where, like, and I think at least with the animated series, you get some of that. He's in high school, and he's got room to grow and everything, and I just, I don't know, like, he still makes some dumb decisions as a teenager. And I mean, I'm someone who works with teenagers. I know that teenagers can make dumb decisions. Hell, I've been a teenager and I've made lots of dumb decisions. But um there's also a lot of learning and growth, I feel, in that series, and that really makes it work for me, I guess. So,
I
um
do
go ahead.
like character growth when we get it. I do like to see the characters advance who they are instead of being static.
Yeah, no, it is nice. Spider-Man didn't get a proper superhero movie until 2002, when Sam Raimi delivered his take on the character for Sony Pictures. There have been, to
I
date,
bet.
three
Yeah.
live action adaptations of the character for the silver screen. And with, hold on, each with significantly different portrayals of both the wall crawler and Peter Parker. The film Spider-Man No Way Home gave moviegoers the unique treat of seeing Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland work together, though fans remain vocal and at times divided as to whose take they prefer. Now, I'm one of those people, I try to avoid that question, because everyone's going to have their opinions, everyone's going to have their strong opinions, and to be perfectly honest, I could probably do an entire episode on that alone. Let me just ask you this, Diane. What would you say about Peter's evolution through the various live action movies? What have you liked and disliked about how he's changed?
Um, I think well, as you were saying, they each have their strengths and their weaknesses. And some of that is strengths and weaknesses of the actors. A lot of that is strengths and weaknesses of the script that they were handed, which
Yes.
they can't do much about.
Yep. You are
Um,
correct. Poor Andrew Garfield.
um, well, and also, like, I know I have some people who are really upset at the lack of quippiness in some of the standalone MCU Spider-Man
Mm-hmm.
movies. There's definitely a shit. You can definitely tell the difference in writers between, say, the level of quip going on in Civil War and in Infinity War compared to the amount of quip going on in Far From Home.
Right.
Um, and obviously when you've got lots of different writers, that's going to be a thing. I do feel like he's felt, yeah, like you said, he's felt younger each time.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Definitely.
though Tobey Maguire was, in high school, that didn't really feel like a high school character. Um, Andrew Garfield, I think, felt. I mean, he was a senior, and I think he felt about like a senior to a freshman in college. I think he felt the age they were expecting him to be.
Right.
Um, I I think that Tom Holland is my favorite. Um, of all of them, but I think they've all really focused on different aspects of Peter. I felt like Tobey Maguire's version was very out of costume focus. You had a lot of costume stuff, but the heart of the movie was out of costume.
Okay.
And I think Andrew Garfield's the heart of the film was in costume.
Makes sense.
And so then I would say that Tom Holland's kind of
Nailed them both.
nailed them both, but also like the heart of his is balancing on that line and the difficulty of doing that. Like he really is leaning in on the whole secret identities are a problem. Obviously the most recent one was all about that.
Yes.
But even from the beginning, I think, that it's really leaned in on that aspect of shit, how do I handle all of this? Which obviously all of them do, but I think he was the one that was where he lived, was in that.
Yeah. No, and I think those, I mean, those are all very valid takes, I think, on each of them. Yeah, I do kind of feel like he gets younger with each movie, and I don't think that's a bad thing, as long as you're rebooting it. I hope they don't reboot anytime soon. I would like to see Tom Holland play this character for a long time, but if he doesn't, I'm gonna wish him all the best, and hope that the next Spider-Man that comes along is up to the task. So, as both Spider-Man and as Peter Parker. So, Spider-Man has featured in video games for over 40 years. As gaming has evolved, so have portrayals of the web-slinger and Peter Parker within them. Video games have provided the opportunity for more complex takes on the character, with some memorable entries allowing gamers to glimpse both Spidey and Peter Parker in substantial detail. Diane, have you played any Spider-Man video games, and what have you noticed about Peter Parker and Spidey's portrayal in them? And I am trying not to laugh as I ask this question because
we know that Diane is not good at video games.
This is one of the reasons that I feel no shame in losing a Marvel contest to you, because I can play the video games.
I tried to play the Peter Parker story arcs in the I have now forgotten the name of it, but it was the one with all the minifigs.
What, the Lego?
No. So it was
the Disney
yeah. And I have the Spider-Man figure to play with, and I have the Venom figure to play with, and that game is intended for 6-year-olds. And I could not stop falling off of buildings.
Can confirm, actually. I played it. God, what was it called? Disney
Infinity?
Yes, I think so. I think it was Disney Infinity. And I was eager to play it. I'd never played, and so it's this fairly open world, like 3D city that you're able to get around in, and you can give me a controller and I'm like, okay, this does, okay, all right. And I'm just ready to go. And I am I'm like going, swinging around town. I'm jumping on buildings, and Diane, I swear, is just like running into walls in the street. Basically, she's running into the sides of buildings, and I'm having to go back and get her. Hey, come on, let's go do this. It was a beautiful disaster, and it was a lot of fun. But okay, if you haven't played a lot of them, then how much about them do you know? Have you ever watched any playthroughs or anything like that?
A little bit, but not a lot. One of them, the 2018 one I have,
Okay.
and I haven't actually played it, and I haven't actually watched anybody play it. That was sort of a plan. I've watched bits and pieces as some of my roommates have played it, but I've never watched the storyline, all the way through.
I would just like to point out that if you ever want to watch someone playing through them, I have streamed plenty of gameplay of this game on my channel.
I
So
will go look for that.
you're absolutely the thing is, like, did you ever play the Batman Arkham games?
Again, I have watched people
Okay.
play them.
The combat system is almost identical, and I
Okay.
love that combat system, especially with Spidey's powers. And so it is just so much fun to to dodge and then like reverse and fire web gadgets at dudes while you're fighting them. I love it so much, and it's one of the reasons I'm so excited for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. And yeah, no, I my body is ready for it. I think I feel like those games really do a good job of capturing the the fantasy of being Spider-Man. They're about as close as you can come to doing it. And I walked away from Marvel's Spider-Man just so happy, and I cannot wait to do it again with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I think they're going to make it even better. So, um,
Let me ask you a question since you're more into the gaming. Has there yet been, and are you looking forward to them putting out a virtual reality version of these games?
so you know how like when people are making a decision about whether or not to buy a console. I know a lot of gamers won't necessarily follow this line of thinking, but some do. I feel like a significant chunk will. It's oftentimes like, what games can I play on this console? One of the reasons I have a Switch is because I want to play The Legend of Zelda. I want to play the Mario Bros. Games. I want to play Super Smash Bros. And the reason I got a PS5 was specifically so that I could play Marvel's Spider-Man 2. So to answer your question, if they make like a full featured Spider-Man game that uses VR, that will probably make me, take the plunge and actually drop money on a virtual reality console. That will get me to do it, because let me tell you, being able to actually web swing, oh my god. Like, I can tell you the reasons we're never actually going to achieve web swinging in real life the way Spider-Man does it. At least not
Has
in
shoulder
not in our,
joints?
yeah, not in our lifetimes. But being able to do that like virtually, oh, sign me up. I will totally do it. So,
A friend of mine let me play for a few minutes on they have the Marvel virtual one of the Marvel VR games, and I got to play as Iron Man for a little bit. And your very first mission as Iron Man is literally to take off from the roof and land back on the roof.
mhm.
And I was not able to complete this mission.
Well, I've tried an Oculus Rift when I went to PAX South a few years ago. And as much as I love the concept of virtual reality, there's a long way to go in terms, I feel, of making it easily consumable for mass culture. And so I think we'll get there eventually. I don't know when, but I think it'll be in the relatively near future. And I think when we do, that's gonna crack video gaming open in a lot of different ways. And I think a Spider-Man game would be an excellent way to do that. So
I agree.
yeah, no, um, but yeah, I've played a couple of Spider-Man games in my time, and I've played the very first one. I played the one on the Atari 2600, which, let me
Oh
tell you, that
wow.
is not a good video game, but
I
it's
don't imagine
it's pixelated Spider-Man though, and so I think that there is the potential for there's always the potential of good storytelling lots of nice spectacle that comes with them. But it's been a lot of fun to watch Spider-Man evolve over the last 40 years. Like the story of gaming and its development in a lot of ways, parallels at a certain point Spider-Man's development, like as a character and how complex that he gets and things like that. You can almost see it as the gaming systems become more complex, and I think that's really cool. So as a gamer, I mean, this is a great year to be a Spider-Man fan simply because we've gotten Across the Spider-Verse already, which is fantastic, and we're going to get Marvel's Spider-Man 2 this year. Next year, we're going to get Beyond the Spider-Verse, and we're going to
God, we're not having to wait long for that.
yes, and we're hopefully going to get the Disney Plus animated Spider-Man show, Marvel or Spider-Man Freshman Year. So it's a good time to be a Spider fan, guys. It really is. All right. I think this is a good time to move into the idea of Peter Parker's legacy, both as a character and, dare I say, as an idea. Um, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Peter Parker, both as Spider-Man and himself, has left an indelible stamp on the Marvel Universe at large. He has given rise to the other heroes who have. Oh, did we lose? Did we lose Diane again?
No, just let me step while you're speaking. I'm gonna step away for just a
Oh,
sec.
okay, all right, that's fine. That's fine. Sorry. All right. Um, he has given rise to other heroes who have followed in his footsteps, from direct successors such as Miles Morales and Cindy Moon to those he has inspired to herodom such as Flash Thompson and Felicia Hardy. He's also had successors in the form of children, depending on which reality you read in the comic books, such as Mayday Parker's Spider Girl and Anna May Annie Parker's Spiderling. Also tied up in Peter Parker's legacy is the idea of youth. From the comics to the movies, Peter's youth and enthusiasm, coupled with his hero's journey, have given rise to a kind of character that Marvel has seized upon as a relatable archetype. You can see echoes of this in characters such as Miles Morales and Cindy Moon, but also Kamala Khan's Ms. Marvel and Sam Alexander's Nova. Arguably even more important, his character has impacted many consumers of popular culture to be the best. Sorry, I did not. I meant inspired, not impacted. Gonna redo that sentence. Arguably, even more important, his character has inspired many consumers of popular culture to be the best versions of themselves as they explore the relationships between power and responsibility. He's far from perfect, with his prejudices, obsessions, and neuroses, but he is at his core a good person trying to do the best he can with the hand he's been dealt. His relatability makes his successes and failures our own, and in his desire to do good, we see the best of ourselves, something to which we can all aspire. Diane, what is Peter Parker's legacy to you?
I think that it I don't think that there is a more iconic phrase in all of superhero media across every character than with great power comes great responsibility. It is the definition of a superhero, bar
Yeah,
none.
I would agree.
And the idea that whatever power you have, whatever ability you have, confers with it an obligation to use that ability or that power for the general good and to help people who do not have that power or that ability, is fairly fundamental to my personal concept of ethics. And I think I understood that phrase before I understood who Spider-Man was, because it so instantly became part of not just superhero ethics, but just, I think, our general cultural zeitgeist understanding of being an ethical person.
I would agree. And I mean, I feel like, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm being simplistic here, but I do feel like a lot of the issues and problems that we that we are experiencing in this day and age seem to be perpetuated by certain people who don't take seriously the responsibility that comes with the power that they may have, be that financial power, political power, just the just the power of being famous, and
Mm-hmm.
so it really does feel sometimes like, hey, you should just ask yourself, what would Peter Parker do? you know I mean, maybe not, but why not? I
What
feel
would
I
Peter Parker think he probably ought to do? Not what would Peter Parker... Because half the time, what would Peter Parker do is panic for a minute.
You're not wrong. You are not wrong. And I think that's one of the things that again makes him relatable.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to do the right thing, but sometimes he can't, And I think we've all been there. Like, yeah, this is probably the right thing to do, but man, I really want to do this other thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I totally get it. And I really think that, you know, I mean, it's pretty obvious. You take one look at me, you can see what Peter Parker's legacy is to me. You know, when Stan Lee died, I was actually out on the reference desk at the library, and I couldn't immediately go back and just let myself cry. So I just started crying at the reference desk. Like I could not stop myself, because this character that he created or helped create meant that much to me. And so, on that day, a lot of my coworkers they actually got to see me, and I was doing the silent cry thing. I was just letting the tears flow, and I was just sitting there helping people as best I could, and until finally someone looked at me and like, whoa, and I'm just like, Stanley died. And they're like, do you want to go in the back? And I'm like, yes, please. So yeah, no, the character obviously means a lot to me. I'm very glad that he continues to get as much love as he does in the media, even as I keep advocating for him to kind of move over and make room for characters like Miles Morales and Cindy Moon and just other types of Gwen Stacy. Like I think Spider-Man is big enough that even if they never age Peter Parker up and these characters all essentially become the same age as they do as tends to happen in comics, Spider-Man is a big enough playground that you can have all kinds of diverse types of characters in it. And I think Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse have done a marvelous job, pun partially intended, of showing us that. And
Yeah.
so I mean, you know, keep giving us some more Peter Parker love, but keep bringing on the other spider characters. Like I love some of the new characters we saw in Across the Spider-Verse.
I mean, I immediately went out and looked up every Hobie Brown comic I could find the minute that was, because I was like, oh, I need more of this.
Oh, he was such a great character. He was such a great character. Let's not talk too much about Hobie, but
Mhm.
this is probably a great time to remind listeners and viewers that on this Friday, June 16th, we will be doing a bonus episode of the Webline where we just do an Across the Spider-Verse spoiler talk. We're going to talk about all the things that Andrew and I really couldn't during our review of Across the Spider-Verse, and we're just gonna let it rip. We're just gonna talk about all the things we loved, all the all the Easter eggs, all the all of the plot points. We're gonna talk about that, and that's gonna be this Friday. It will be live streamed here on my YouTube channel. So if you want to see that, come and check us out this Friday. I believe, Diane, are you going to be joining me for that one?
I will.
All right. And I'm trying to get a couple of my previous guests, Michael Hale and Andrew Jones, to join us for that evening so that I can say every webline guest ever. It's three people. I don't know if that's going to happen because they are both very busy and have other things going on, but I definitely would like, to have as many of them as possible to just talk about what we loved about Across the Spider-Verse without a filter. So, all right. And I believe that brings us to the end of the show. Now, before I go into the outro, Diane, do you have any final words that you would like to say about Peter Parker, about his legacy, about his portrayal through any of the mediums that we have discussed today?
I think Peter Parker is one of those characters where I think the only reason we can have all the spider sonas, all the other spider family, spider characters that we have is because of how instantly relatable Peter is, so that each other spider is somebody who immediately was able to see themselves in Peter and then add their own characteristics to that description. But I think it's because he's so deeply relatable on so many levels to the people that read him, that made for this explosion of other versions, because it's all just each person looking at themselves, whoever they are, and going, well, what would I be if I were Peter?
And I think that's a beautiful legacy, honestly. To be able, like, you know, one of the big themes in Into the Spider-Verse is anyone can wear the mask. And I very much believe that. And I remember the uproar about 10 or 11, maybe 12 years ago when they were talking about killing off Peter Parker in the Ultimate Comics, and that he was going to be succeeded by a black, a black um, boy. I mean, he was like 11 at the time or something, 13. But I remember so many talking heads getting upset, and I'm sorry, but this is what I saw on TV. They were all old white men, guys. And they were so mad. They were so mad. Spider-Man is a white man. Like, that was the through line. And it was, I think the Daily Show really did a good job of lampooning him by showing them, oh, here's a picture of a black man as Spider-Man. And it was Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in costume, because you can't see under the mask, and
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't even matter. And so I like that controversy, as it were, has gone back and is now just morphed into, you've got people with like physical disabilities imagining what they would be like as Spider-Man. You've got black, Latino, Mexican, you know, British, you've got
Indian.
yes. Oh God, Pavitra Prabhakar. My God, I loved him so much. Um, like I want to see more of this. I want to see this, and it looks like Spider-Man has gotten to that point where it's like anyone can wear the mask. Do your own thing. And yeah, no, that's a beautiful legacy, and I really am happy that it all comes from this character that I have identified with so much. I think that's wonderful, and I think that is a great place to go ahead and close off this segment of the podcast. So, if you enjoyed this episode of the Webline, please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube channel, simply named Spidey Librarian. The Webline is also available on audio services, so when you see us on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or another such service, please leave a review and rating. You can find me on my socials under the name Spidey Librarian on Twitter, Instagram, WordPress, and Twitch. And finally, if you'd like to shoot me an email at spideylibrarian@gmail.com, where I'll be happy to hear your thoughts, rants, and ideas. Who knows? Your email might be featured in an upcoming episode. Diane, where can you be found if your listeners wanted to know more about you?
Well, I'm not on a lot of social media lately, but you can find me on everyone's favorite health site. I am dyionisiac, Dionysiac, on Tumblr, and that is where I put most of my Marvel content.
All right. Thank you very much. Be sure to join us next Sunday on the Webline, where we'll be working on our first tier list. The subject of the tier list, Spider-Man's remarkably robust Rogues Gallery. Thank you for listening, and until the next episode, I'll be wishing you a good day.